you wake me up?
The spaceship Avalon is on autopilot, heading to another planet for colonization. The crew of the ship, consisting of 258 people, along with 5,000 passengers, is in cryosleep. The ship's energy shield deflects asteroid attacks and other dangers from space. However, a particularly large asteroid has caused a system malfunction. The artificial intelligence started the repair work, but a certain component could not be restored. As a result, Jim Preston, one of the colonists, was awakened from cryosleep. Jim was disoriented and did not understand what was happening. The artificial intelligence informed him that he had supposedly spent 120 years in cryosleep. Now he and the other colonists are about to settle on another planet, where a new chapter of human history will begin. Having received his identification bracelet, Jim left the cryosection and entered his cabin. Until the end of the journey, which will last another 4 months, this will be Jim's personal home. After scanning the bracelet, Jim retrieved his luggage. The artificial intelligence also advised him to drink more fluids to recover faster from anabiosis. The first thing Jim did was tidy himself up, preparing to meet the other passengers. However, to his surprise, he found that there was no one else aboard besides him. Meanwhile, the artificial intelligence was telling him about Homestead 2, a fertile planet where the Avalon is heading. Jim was baffled, not understanding where the other 5,000 passengers and the remaining 258 crew members had gone. In a state of panic, Jim ran around the ship, calling out for anyone. After this, Jim entered the elevator, and in zero gravity, reached another section of the ship. It was the main lobby of Avalon. Jim turned to the artificial intelligence, asking where the people were. However, wherever Jim went, all the ship's compartments were empty. This made Jim panic even more. He realized that things were bad and went to the observatory, asking the artificial intelligence to show the route. Jim was shocked to find out that there were still 90 years left until their destination. This meant that for some reason, he had woken up earlier than the rest. Now Jim doesn't know what to do. He sent a message to Earth asking for help in resolving the issue, but the message would take 15 years to reach Earth. It will take another 55 years before a reply arrives. Passing by the ship's bar, Jim saw a man and was about to rejoice, but it turned out to be an android bartender. He introduced himself as Arthur and offered Jim whiskey. Now for Jim, Arthur is the only conversation partner who resembles a human being. But it was a poor consolation. From now on, Jim started his lonely life aboard Avalon. Many of the ship's functions were unavailable to him, as he was not a gold-level passenger. Finding a manual for the hibernation pods, Jim attempted to repair his, but to no avail. After that, Jim made attempts to break into the airlock of the cryo division, where the ship's crew was located, but access is impossible without special permission. Jim had no choice but to return to the bar and chat with Arthur. The bartender advised him to stop worrying about the situation and just enjoy life. Jim did just that. He gained access to the luxury apartments and used all the entertainment that Avalon offered. However, this quickly bored Jim. He even stopped taking care of his appearance. The loneliness was slowly driving him mad. One day he went to the passenger cryo division and found another compartment with spacesuits that could withstand the harsh conditions of space. Putting on one of the suits, Jim exited the ship and found himself in open space. The vast expanse of the universe was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Jim couldn't hold back his tears, realizing he was doomed to a life of solitude, while the rest of the passengers awaited an exciting future on another planet. Returning to the ship, Jim removed his spacesuit and was about to open the hatch again to end his suffering. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. Running away from there, Jim tripped and fell. When he got up, he noticed a very beautiful woman in one of the cryopods. Her name is Aurora Lane. She is a writer. Jim fell in love at first sight and found information about Aurora in the passenger catalog. The girl dreamed of a life full of adventure, which is why she decided to go to another planet. Now Jim constantly visited Aurora's pod and watched her for a long time. According to the records in the passenger catalog, Aurora had a good sense of humor and charisma. Jim told Arthur about this girl. Jim feels that the universe is unfair. He found the woman of his dreams, who is simultaneously so close and so far away. At some point, Jim had a fateful decision in mind. He decided to share his idea with Arthur and ask for advice. On the one hand, Jim understood that he was about to do something wrong, and on the other, he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in solitude. The android said that waking Aurora was a wonderful idea, because in his opinion, Jim needed a friend. And yet Jim hesitated to do it, trying in every way to distract himself from thoughts of Aurora. But this was much harder than he thought. One day Jim finally shaved his beard and decided to wake Aurora. Using the cryopod manual, Jim brought the girl out of hibernation. Aurora began to wake up gradually. Jim watched this in shock, realizing there was no turning back. Before Aurora finally woke up, Jim took the tools and ran away. Having hidden the tools, Jim still couldn't comprehend what he had done. Later he found Aurora in the main lobby. Like Jim after waking up, she was disoriented and calling for someone. Jim approached her and introduced himself. Aurora did not understand what was happening, since the crew was supposed to wake up a month before the passengers. Jim told her that apart from the two of them, no one else had awakened, and took Aurora to the observatory. The artificial intelligence explained that there were still 89 years left until the destination. Later, Jim admitted that he had been trying to penetrate the crew's cryosection, where the ship's control center is located, but the place is heavily protected. Jim did not hide that he woke up a year ago. Aurora panicked and returned to the passenger cryosection, intending to hibernate again. Jim stopped her, saying that it was impossible as they did not have the necessary equipment. Night fell on the ship, just like on Earth. Aurora went to her cabin to recover after antibiosis. Watching her go, Jim felt guilty. He went to the bar to have a whiskey. He also asked Arthur not to tell anything to Aurora. The android promised to keep the secret. Aurora is desperately trying to find a way to hibernate again, but in vain. Neither she nor Jim has any idea that there is a malfunction on the ship. Since Aurora is a gold-level passenger, her breakfast is more luxurious than Jim's. Now she can take delicious food for him too. Aurora is determined to solve this problem, but Jim said that over the past year he had tried everything. Unlike him, Aurora was not ready to give up and went to the medical bay, hoping to find hibernation equipment there. As Jim had said, there was nothing. Attempts to penetrate the ship's crew cryosection also led to nothing. In order not to go mad, Aurora began to keep a diary. It seems she is reconciled with the fact that she will never reach New Earth. Aurora is very frightened by the prospect of spending her entire life on the journey and never reaching the destination.
Why did you do it?
The guy was confused, thinking she knew the truth. But it turned out that Aurora was simply curious about why Jim decided to leave Earth. The guy replied that he wanted to start life from scratch. As a mechanical engineer, Jim would be useful in a new world. Aurora and Jim began to spend a lot of time together. Aurora shared that she had planned to live on Homestead 2 for a year, and then return to Earth. This would have taken more than a century, but Aurora was ready for this. To distract Aurora from sad thoughts, Jim introduced her to the ship's entertainment. They had quite a good time, and then Jim introduced Aurora to Arthur. Despite all the amenities offered by Avalon, Aurora is still very sad, because her future is ruined. When she left for her cabin, Arthur told Jim that this was an excellent choice. Jim decided not to waste time and started courting Aurora. His little surprises lifted her spirits. Once, Jim reprogrammed a cleaning robot and passed a note through it, inviting Aurora on a date. Of course Aurora happily agreed. Later dressed in a stylish suit, Jim came to Aurora's cabin. She was wearing a gorgeous evening dress. Jim was amazed. They first went to the bar, where Arthur wished them a pleasant evening, and then to the restaurant. Despite the deplorable situation, Aurora joked around. She also talked about her father, who was a military journalist and traveled around the Earth. When Aurora was 17, her father passed away. Jim loved getting to know his beloved better. After dinner, he surprised her by suggesting a walk in open space. Wearing spacesuits, they left the ship and admired the stars and nebulae surrounding them. At one point, Jim asked Aurora if she trusted him. After she nodded, she and Jim went straight out into space. Thanks to the ropes, they remained attached to the ship. Back inside, Jim and Aurora kissed. Jim felt absolutely happy next to his loved one, and the feeling was mutual. Now Jim and Aurora are a couple. Under any other circumstances, they might never have met, but fate had other plans. This was not the future Aurora wanted, but Jim helped her believe that her life wasn't ending, it was just beginning. When the Avalon passed by the star system of Arcturus, the two passengers went to the observation deck to admire the view. It was truly a mesmerizing sight. Jim wished his beloved a happy birthday. This was her gift from the universe. In the evening, the couple celebrated the event at the bar. Aurora was happy that there were no secrets between her and Jim, but Arthur clearly disagreed. Jim stepped away to the restroom to gather his wits. He planned to propose to his beloved.
I remember this day, a year ago. Jim was so looking forward to meeting you.
The girl didn't understand what the android meant, so Arthur said that it was Jim who had awakened her. Hearing this, Aurora was in deep shock. When Jim returned, he could tell from her look that Arthur hadn't kept the secret. Aurora couldn't understand how Jim could have done this. She was on the verge of a panic attack and forbade Jim to come near her. In shock, Aurora went to their cabin and became hysterical. She couldn't believe that Jim had destroyed her life out of his selfish motives. After some time, Jim returned to their shared cabin, but Aurora's belongings were no longer here. In the morning he tried to talk to her, but she didn't want to hear anything. At night, Aurora woke Jim up and desperately attacked him, wanting to vent her emotions somehow. But it didn't help. Later, Jim contacted her over the loudspeaker, saying that he had been very lonely.
I don't care!
Once, Jim noticed that a massive failure began to occur in the ship's systems, while Aurora was getting drunk and talking to Arthur. Aurora is writing a new book, but she doesn't even know why. As the only one who can read it, she hates right now. The android said that time heals all wounds. Of course he is incapable of understanding human feelings. When Jim walked into the bar, Aurora immediately went to her cabin, where she watched a farewell video from friends. They wished her luck in a new world, hoping that she would find her happiness there. Aurora is in deep depression. She lay in her cryopod, thinking about all the missed opportunities. To earn the forgiveness of his beloved, Jim planted a tree next to the fountain in the main lobby of the ship. When Jim was in the elevator, the mechanism jammed. There were also malfunctions in the kitchen. Jim managed to get out and heard the voice of the senior assistant to Captain Gus Mancuso over the loudspeaker. It turns out that the assistant to the captain also came out of hibernation. Gus was wondering who planted the tree on the ship. Knowing that it is still 88 years to fly to the destination, Gus realized the seriousness of the situation. He too woke up as a result of a hibernation system failure. Since Gus has clearance, access to the crew cryosection and the ship's bridge is now open. Gus tried to diagnose the ship to identify the problem, but the system was damaged. Gus said that now the systems will have to be checked manually, but the problems don't end there. Robots began to break down en masse. After giving tasks to Aurora and Jim, Gus went to check the cryopods. Of course he immediately guessed that Aurora woke up not by accident. Jim didn't try to justify himself. He understands that his act is unforgivable. Later, Aurora approached the assistant captain, demanding that he make Jim answer for his crime. But Gus is powerless to do anything. Moreover, he feels bad, as the breakdown in his cryopod was very serious. Gus went to his cabin to rest. His condition is rapidly deteriorating. In the meantime, Aurora was swimming in the pool. This is how she distracted herself from sad thoughts. Due to another failure in the ship's systems, there was a loss of gravity. Jim was asleep and didn't notice how he ended up in weightlessness. Meanwhile, the water in the pool started to float in the air. Aurora desperately tried to escape from the bubble. Waking up, Jim realized that something was wrong. Aurora had lost consciousness, but suddenly gravity was restored. Aurora came to her senses and swam out of the water. Jim and Aurora immediately rushed to Gus's cabin. He tried to solve the problem, but all the ship's systems were failing one after another. Probably, this happened due to the asteroid attack that occurred 2 years ago. If the breakdown is not repaired, Avalon will not reach its destination. At some point, Gus lost consciousness. Jim and Aurora urgently took him to the medical bay. The scan detected 612 pathologies in his body. According to the artificial intelligence's conclusion, Gus had only a few hours to live. Hearing this, he silently left the medical bay. Later, Jim and Aurora found him on the observation deck. Gus admonished them to take care of each other. He also gave Jim his identification bracelet, granting access to all sections. A few minutes later, Gus passed away. Jim and Aurora realized that the fate of the Avalon and all the people on board depended on them. Now they must act together to save the Avalon. Gravity on the ship was constantly disappearing. All mechanisms including the android were malfunctioning. The pair went to the engineering section hoping to manually find and fix the breakdown. When they opened one of the airlocks, they began to be pulled inside. It turned out that a breach had formed in the ship's hull, depriving it of its hermeticity. Jim was able to patch the hole. Oxygen levels and pressure stabilized. The main problem was that one of the asteroids had penetrated the energy shield and damaged the computer controlling the reactor. Jim was going to fix this, and Aurora assisted him. Together they managed to restore the functionality of the main computer, but the ventilation system failed. Things were really bad. Jim could not cool the reactor even manually. Then the guy realized that he would have to go out into space to open the shutter. When he does this, Aurora will have to release all the fire into space. She understands that this could cost Jim his life, but there is no other choice. Before leaving, Jim left her Gus's identification bracelet. Putting on a spacesuit, the guy was preparing to go out into open space. With tears in her eyes, Aurora asked him to come back alive. The temperature inside the ship began to reach critical levels. All mechanisms and surfaces became very hot. Aurora was injured, but assured Jim that everything was okay. Meanwhile, Jim reached the sluice. However, the shutter was not holding, so to keep it open, Jim would have to stay. Aurora begged him to get out of there, but he said that it was the only way out, and told her to release the fire. The lives of more than 5,000 people are at stake. Aurora was crying, but did what she had to. Jim held on as long as he could. Fortunately, his spacesuit was sturdy, robust to withstand such temperatures. Jim was thrown into space with the flame. His spacesuit was damaged, but despite everything he survived. Hearing her lover's voice, Aurora was happy. Learning that his rope had snapped, she rushed to help him without hesitation. Jim's oxygen was running out. Before losing consciousness, he asked Aurora for forgiveness. In the meantime, she put on a spacesuit and went out into open space for Jim, but her rope was too short. Fortunately, she managed to get a hold of Jim's rope and pull him into the ship. The first thing Aurora did was place her beloved in a medical pod. Unfortunately, by this point, Jim had stopped breathing, but the artificial intelligence under Aurora's guidance managed to resuscitate him. Jim regained consciousness. Aurora was happy. Later, Aurora fixed Arthur, after which she and Jim held a funeral for Gus, leaving him in open space. Using Gus's identification bracelet, Jim gained access to many ship functions and was able to turn the medical pod into a hibernation pod. This means that one of them can fall asleep again and complete the journey to Homestead 2. Jim wants Aurora to do this and fulfill her dreams. He took away her chance and is now paying his debt. Jim also assured the beloved that he can handle things on his own and that he will always come to her cryopod. Aurora understands that she will never see Jim again. That's why she decided to stay with her loved one. When Jim proposed to her, Aurora agreed without hesitation. The couple is happy together on the Avalon. They have each other, and that's the most important thing. 88 years later, the ship was almost at its destination. While the crew was asleep, a lot had happened. Jim and Aurora, having lived a happy life together, transformed the ship's main lobby into a piece of paradise.